Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa buddham dhammam sangham namasami. It's good to reflect on how we've spent our day. What is happening in our lives? And whatever happens really is there to teach us. Even if it's unpleasant, it's teaching us what we need to know and what we need to learn the most. And that's why the Buddha uses suffering as a teacher, because it's unpleasant and it makes us pause and question and examine. When we're having a good time, we're enjoying, we're so easily carried away with that. But when we suffer, don't we stop and question it and wonder why? We don't have to look very far for that kind of teaching. And we often run into situations that are difficult or challenging to handle. So we learn to welcome in what is difficult and hard to welcome, for that very reason, that it is an opportunity to learn something. And welcoming it is only the first step. It's the beginning of a process of undoing, unwinding, at least taking down the barriers that we may have ourselves created within us, to be able to see and understand why we feel hurt or pained. And then, if needed, we learn to set boundaries in our lives so that we can build a field of goodness and peace for ourselves and for each other. So, how do we unwind? How do we take things apart? And how do we study them and look at them more closely so that we can offer ourselves some safety, staying within the bounds of the Dhamma, staying within a field or a resort that is safe because we're following Sila and we're trying to live in a way that is not harmful. But are we ready to do this? We have to begin from where we are, and gradually, as we learn, we move to the next depth or refinement of practice. For myself, I noticed that when I learn how to welcome or receive what is painful, I acknowledge that it hurts. And I try to look more closely to understand what's going on, what's happening. Where is the resistance? Why is it there? And I also look at the origin of that difficulty so that I'm going from the first noble truth, which is seeing that I'm suffering, to the second noble truth, which is finding the origin. And that's a more involved work. It means maybe sifting through my conditioning, the state of the mind and the body, so that I can really notice, where am I caught? How am I stuck, or why? And what really hurts? Why am I trembling? So that's the practice in daily life of the first noble truth, that there is dukkha when we feel the pain in the body or the mind, and we realize that we are suffering. We notice pain and being present for it, and that's a beautiful practice right there. Even if it's a difficult moment, maybe we'd rather not experience it. Experience that and learn from the suffering, because the truth of suffering is our way to freedom. To suffer or have pain and to know it as a noble truth is so significant, because it puts us back on the path. Then we can hold it so differently. We can hold it lightly. It becomes a positive thing, a teaching. And we can go through each of the Four Noble Truths with that very understanding. This hurts, suffering is unpleasant. It arises in consciousness due to causes and conditions, and we can bring it to cessation by bearing witness to it and not being involved in it as someone who suffers. Because that in itself isn't true. There is no one who suffers. There is suffering. And there is the experience of it, the ability to witness it, and the ability to let it go. And that's the path that leads to the ending of our suffering, right then and there. And we wake up to the truth of this is how it is. This is how things are. When we're aware of the truth of suffering, that's mindfulness. That's knowing dukkha as it arises and ceases. Usually we practice with some neutral object, but how wonderful it is when we can apply these truths to our daily life experience. And of course, when we recognize the truth of suffering, we're taking refuge in Dhamma. And that's how the path can arise for us in daily life, in the most ordinary moments. And into this experience, it's really good for us to weave the thread of metta, goodwill, even to the extent of loving kindness and compassion, which act like a balm to soothe us when things are difficult, and to encourage us to withstand, or help us to be able to study what we're feeling, even if it's very difficult to bear, or even if it's something we've always tried to avoid. Once we try to look at it more closely, then it might become something to let go of, rather than avoid, because avoiding means we're still resisting, we're carrying something through memory, or a sense of identifying with a past hurt or a past trauma. So to study our suffering mindfully is a deep way for us to work with the noble truth of suffering as a teacher. And then, instead of a burden, it becomes a way to awaken. No matter how much this I, or this sense of self, dies in the shadow of our own ignorance, we still have to coax ourselves back to being present for that suffering with compassion, with mercy. And being the student of our suffering, not easy to do, but worth doing. And that's how we defragment our suffering. We clean it, we purify it, just like you clean your computer when you defragment. If the only meaning of life is to act from and for what we value or what we think is pleasurable, then it's really worth going through these painful processes. And maybe they're painful, maybe they're not. Because when we turn them into teachings, then we get to the point of inclining towards that which is unconditioned. So we're freeing ourselves from our conditioning. And to be able to do this day in and day out, we really have to keep our mental radar working sharply all the time, so that we don't bump into experience without mindfulness. That's the power of bearing witness to present moment experience. Just like when you drive a car, if you're a driver, you never take your eyes off the road, because you might hit someone or swerve into a ditch. We tend to be ruled by or led by greed, hatred, and delusion. So mindfulness is such a friend. It's a Dhamma friend for us to help us realize what we should pick up and what we should not pick up, so that we're not compromising our sila, our samadhi, or our wisdom. So when you have an umbrella over your head that has holes in it, it doesn't keep us dry. So for this reason, we practice mindfulness that is not holy, whole, full of holes, but it's holy and it's whole. And this helps us to let go of the rubbish in our life day by day. And we cultivate the jewels in the heart. We polish and shine them. And this is what daily practice is like. It's just like taking out the rubbish in your home. We fill up bags of rubbish and then we put them outside before they begin to smell. And we even sort out the plastic and other recyclables and deposit them in the right containers. We don't put garbage with recyclables. So that means a lot of vigilance. If we're slack, then the rubbish starts to accumulate, and it takes longer and becomes heavier to try to move it outside, fit it all into our big outdoor rubbish bin. As for clearing up and removing the rubbish of the mind, we're the only ones that can do that for ourselves. There's no one that's going to come and collect our rubbish. No one. And so our mental garbage has to be serviced. And it accumulates very quickly. And our job, the best way we can do that is to keep emptying it out. It's interesting how fast it accumulates. So we have to have this unrelenting sacrifice and renunciation, so that we constantly spill out the rubbish and empty it out. Because emptying it out is giving it up. Even if we think it's something that's going to make us happy, but it's an attachment, we know that it's better to let it go. It will be a purification. It'll create a purity for us, and we don't compromise. It gives us the ground for incomparable contentment and peace. And we learn that by practicing it. To be content with whatever is happening. Maybe it's just this breath, or being in the forest, or being with situations that are not comfortable. But if we can go to a place of bearing witness to a state of mind that doesn't have a me or a mine in it, taking refuge in non-duality, so that we are not the mind, not the body, but we're practicing a pure, purified, present moment awareness in tune with, connected to the present moment, with a purity of awareness that is really where we can know the truth of what we are. We can't know that reality through thinking, but only through the intuitive knowledge in the heart, which we can gather through sharp and discerning mindfulness, and through our own ability to be present for our experience moment by moment, whether it's painful, through feeling it, through our brokenness, through our attachment, or our enslavement to objects and experiences. What we experience in life is an awareness, as we practice more and more, how driven we are by our attachments, and how freeing it is for us to study them and get to know them for what they are, so that we're not just being propelled forward and driven by the past and by wanting something in the future or avoiding what we don't like. And we see the emptiness of the thoughts as they roll through the mind, moment by moment. They have no power except the power that we give them. And so knowing that, we can keep turning our minds and our hearts to this wisdom of knowing the present moment and being aware of what we're choosing, how we're choosing, being guided by our virtue, our ethical commitment, and acting with wisdom and compassion by being able to stay present, totally present moment by moment, and being really in tune with the kilesas arising, preventing them not acting out from them, and being mindful and acting well with an intent of harmlessness, renunciation, and generosity. So then it's like bowing to the present moment. Every moment is like a flower on the shrine. Whatever happens, we listen. We offer our full attention to this moment. So when the mind turns up something that's not true or even dangerous, our listening, when it's penetrating and acute listening, it's a shelter. It gives us safety so that we don't make bad choices or we don't get into troubling situations. We're protected then by our wisdom or our discernment, and we know the truth when it's there. We protect it. And when we protect the truth, when we protect the Dhamma, then of course it will protect us. That's how we learn. Maybe what once appeared uninteresting or unpleasant, now we can just hold it as this is what's arising and we let it go. We may not have to be troubled by it as we had been in the past. We're able to see more clearly. Not everybody has a chance to witness their suffering. To really be a witness, we have to be objective, not involved with, and know when greed is arising or aversion, so that we can stay in that field of objectivity. And for many of us, some forms of suffering are very subtle, and it takes a refinement of mindfulness to notice that, so that we can be on guard and aware. This pure awareness is a tremendous refuge for us. It can prevent suffering that we need not endure, because we stay clear of those things that get us into trouble. And we can find a stillness within us from which the heart can really make good choices. If the mind is moving quickly and we're not developing that samadhi, that real stillness in the heart, then it's much more difficult for us to assess the situations that arise. But when the mind becomes more calm and we're taking refuge in the Dhamma, then we can stop our thoughts and actually perceive better, discern better how to choose what is the wisest course in tricky situations. We can also purify the mind more when we can bring thoughts to stillness. We stop judgments, we stop the worrying, we resolve restlessness and anxiety. And then we can resolve the hindrances as they arise, because when the mind is filling up with wanting, not wanting, restlessness or dullness, doubt or ill will, that kind of stillness helps us stay centered. We're in the center of what we're feeling. The hindrances have less access. They're less able to stir us up. And so we can watch from that still point there in the mind itself. We watch everything that is arising and ceasing in our life. When situations turn sour, we can just hold to a certain level of calm and stillness and not jump, not get worried or frightened. Fear, very difficult to work with, but we can see the impermanence. Once we see our thoughts and our feelings, our mind states as impermanent, empty, and not what we are, they don't belong to us. They're just arising and ceasing, conditioned phenomena coming and going. And we don't have to hold on to any of it, neither the anger nor the joy, not the autumn leaves nor the sunshine. We see it all as just coming and going, entering into consciousness and leaving again. And the more that we bear witness to it and see it for what it is, we see the fear as a conditioned phenomena, and we let it go. We see the loss and the lack of ownership, and then there's nothing that's lost. There's no one to own it, and there's nothing to own. So we watch, and we know this is not mine, this is not me, not who I am. And we bear witness. If we bear witness in this way, then the mind begins to really grow peaceful. And that's a moment of freedom. So we practice watching what's happening in the body, what's happening in the mind, and taking refuge in observing, being aware with that purity of awareness. And then we take responsibility for our life and the way we live it, and seeing that we have an ethical choice to respond peacefully, harmlessly to all things in our life. liking, disliking, holding on, attaching, running away from, the restless mind, going wild with thoughts. It's like a mountain climber. It takes a while to get some experience climbing up that mountain. We have to endure unbelievable storms and maybe freezing temperatures, feeling weak or not having enough oxygen, sometimes slipping on the ice and being unable to put one foot in front of the other, or the wind is so strong it's cutting, the heights are so high they're dizzying, sometimes like walking blind in a desert of snow or sun, with mighty glaciers stretching into the horizon. Sometimes in life we have a sense of isolation. Then, like the mountain climber, we get a better view. And we hold the Dhamma. And we keep climbing, we keep going. Because when we are on this path of Dhamma, we have a true support and a true safety line. Even if it seems to stretch on forever, we don't give up. Whatever goodness comes from our climbing, we rejoice in that. And we find an incredible resource of strength to keep going deeper and deeper. So the heights of the mountain, when we're going within, it's a depth. So we're going upwards, but actually we're going inwards into the heart. It's an internal height. It's an Everest. It's Mount Everest within us. And when we go that height and go deeply within, the view becomes more and more breathtaking. That's the freedom that the Buddha talked about. The freedom of going into the silence of the heart, where we find real seclusion from the world. And we no longer struggle. So may we all come to that profound serenity and mystery of the interior silence right here in the depths of our own heart. So I offer you that reflection for tonight.